You remember being 17, all those weird conflicting feelings about what you want to do with your life and how weird adults seemed, wanting to be treated like a grown-up and yet still being a kid, piloting a robot against extra-dimensional forces who wanted to suck the life out of the human race? Okay, fine, maybe that one only happened to me. But it also happens in Captain Earth, a story about one kid's last summer as a child and learning about how the world is for good or ill. In Captain Earth, the Globe organization are at odds with a group called the Planetary Gears, whose members are called Kilt Gangs. The Kilt Gang assault the Earth using both their natural forms and their terrestrial weapons called Machine Goodfellows, and Globe responds with their own machines, primarily the Earth Engine, but later including the Nebula and Flare engines. The Earth Engine's full form is only usable in space, while the Earth Engine Ordinary is a more basic version that's good on the ground. Got all that so far? The Kilt Gang are robots with human forms, not the other way around. This may be hard to keep straight at first because Tepe, one of the Kilt Gangs, not a spoiler, it happens within the first 2 episodes, does this thing that makes him stop being a Kilt Gang, but then makes him human, I guess, or something. Whatever. It's all gibberish anyway. The Kilt Gang also have some sort of evil HAL 9000 robot that plays havoc behind the scenes too, and ends up being the catalyst for what makes Season 2 kick off. But it, like a lot of the show, seems superfluous at the outset. Do we really need this much background? Well, maybe. But once it gets to the point to make it count, it still feels like it could have been chopped down a bit. So this finally brings me to the main characters. Holy Moses, what a ride. Daiichi Manatsu is a 17-year-old kid whose father piloted an Earth Engine into the Kilt Gang when they first attacked a few years back, sacrificing himself to buy the Earth time to prepare. Because of reasons to be explained by the series, he can manifest a weapon called a Live Laster, a mysterious gun that may be an organism that fires orgone energy, which functions in the same way as Getter rays in this series. When the baddies attack, he goes to take up the same position his dad did and fight them head-on in the completed Earth Engine. He's joined by Tepe, the former Kilt Gang, Akari, a self-styled magical girl hacker, and Hannah, who is just... she's a lot of things. She's special and important to the plot, and very odd overall. She's the kind of character that they lump a lot of plot into, and it kind of makes her a bit top-heavy. So once they knock out the first 2 Kilt Gangs, Mocha and Amarok, the series takes place almost entirely on Earth, while both teams go hunting for the other missing Kilt Gangs. Of course, it doesn't all go smoothly, and by the time the series hits the halfway point, it's mostly in space again, which is kind of what I wanted from the series to begin with. So are you still following me? Because I know this is a lot to take in for the first 2 episode summary. Holy cow, this show has a lot of baggage to it. Anyway, the main crew, Daiichi, Hana, Tepe, and Akari, are now known as the Midsummer's Knights, which is a really, really lame pun, but they are Earth's first and last hope against the Planetary Gears, who want to drain the Earth dry. And as the leader, Daiichi is known as Captain Earth. And if that seems like too much to keep a handle on, you probably don't watch a whole lot of robot shows now, do ya? Keeping all this crap straight comes second nature to me at this point, but I know a lot of people who think this is just too much farting around for something that ends up being just 2 toys hitting against each other. I'm giving the super basic rundown here after all that, and there's a lot more going on behind the scenes that helps the show feel well thought out, at least for the most part. However, even with all that, there is a lot of peculiarity with the writing of this show. One of the biggest things that I've noticed about Captain Earth is that they seem to be in that very odd situation where most of the plot-relevant dialogue is made up of 2 things. 1, it's all English words that are designating organizations or what goofball magic tech that's making the plot roll along, and 2, it's completely straight-faced, even as people are describing getting their libidos sucked out. That's what the Kilt Gang are here to do. Orgone energy comes from the human libido, which means that because you want to bang out, you can get your energy sucked out of it. So where are my other aces in the audience? I think we're safe from this invasion. Who knew, right? If you haven't heard my somewhat coherent rant on modern mech shows, you should know that I've noted how many modern shows seem to be more than a little sex-obsessed. Captain Earth definitely suffers from this, though it's not exactly as blatant, it just happens to be a plot point. They do love their fan service shots, though, no question. But more to the point, goddammit, it's kind of stupid. Even by robot show standards lately, this is derpy. But the fact that they play it so completely straight-laced is what's got me all bunched up in knots here. Is this supposed to be a jab or a parody? Or is precisely what's going on screen precisely what's meant to be said? Either way, I'm a little cross-eyed over it, because neither explanation is terribly good in my opinion. Considering the guy behind Star Driver, Igarashi Takuya, is behind it, I don't think it's supposed to be a parody. I think it's supposed to be fully straight played. But there's still a big problem with reading it completely straight when it comes to orgone energy and draining libido. Either the guy was getting laid a lot or he was in the middle of a nasty divorce. Daiichi isn't a huge fan of being the captain here, to start at least, which is kinda lame. I suppose a lot of this show centers around these kids being in way over their heads with stuff they couldn't hope to have a handle on, and that's what made Gundam really good too. Captain Earth is really not Gundam though. The world is way bigger than they understand and much more dangerous, and at the same point, there comes a time when you have to nut up or shut up, to turn a phrase. The whole show is do or die, and it takes the entirety of the first season to get them to realize that point. Now, once they do, then the show hits this turning point and this wonderful stride, and it becomes a blast to get through, but getting to that point is still 13 episodes worth of work. I will say this, one of the most important things about a robot show is how good the mech designs are, and I don't think that Captain Earth is too much of a slouch in this aspect. The ones who fight on Earth, called Ordinaries, look pretty basic, and while the main character mechs are pretty good, the ones used by the Kilt Gang on Earth are kind of bleh. The big engine ones look mean as hell, even though they're kind of dinky compared to the huge Kilt Gangs that they're fighting. They have what I would call the new old-fashioned look. They wouldn't look out of place next to Escaflowne or the Getter Robo from Go, but they're not as over-designed or weird-looking like some of the later mechs of the 90s and 2000s. There's still more design elements to them than the original sort of mecha, but they're not over-advanced to the point of being ugly and clumsy-looking. The Kilt Gang, on the other hand, look distinctly alien and only vaguely humanoid. It definitely hammers home that they are pretty far removed from human life as we understand it. Of course, the Planetary Gear's Avatar help out a lot in that regard, too. The worst of them is definitely Amara, who looks like someone Sonic the Hedgehog Gajinka gone wrong. Ugh. But they're not too awful, all things considered, just very, very oddly dressed. There's a lot of work done to make the characters resonate, and I think it works pretty well overall. Daichi and the other Midsummer's Nights are all the kind of characters that I can really readily appreciate for what they do to the story. I don't feel like I hate any characters in it, I just wish they would kind of get on with it.
Yes, get on with it!
Daichi and Akari are both young people coming into adulthood and finding out what that means for their place in the world. Hana and Teppei are both turncoats, who seem to be wise beyond their years, but they're naive enough to be relatable and not have all the answers right out the gate. The new characters brought in get more and more distinctly cruel, like the idol who becomes an artillery pilot and goes from spreading cheer to draining it, in her own words. These are the kind of characters that make me really feel like whoever was writing it didn't really get what people are looking for in a super robot show. Now, it's worth noting that it's not a clear distinction on whether this is a super robot or a real robot show, at least in the beginning, but by the time we get to the end battles, it's definitely a super robot show, and I will consider it as such. This show does crib a lot from Eureka 7 a fair bit too, especially both in the design category and in the way the mecha look and move. It's a nice fusion that would not have been out of place in the mid-90s, though it's a little bit too 2010 sensibility to really fit in that era. The setting is very much at odds with itself because of this. The super robot aspects of it are immediately obvious with the extended transformation sequences, the super space magic gobbledygook, and the I fight for my friends sort of thing that they've got going on. But the setting has real robot written all over it, especially with the characterization presented. The show seems to have come to terms with that no problem, but I don't know if the audience going into it will, at least not long enough to get to the halfway mark where things really pick up. Overall, I feel that Captain Earth has a big problem with its tone and pacing. Calling it glacial is kind of like saying a brick is kind of hard. It does pick up admirably once they get out of the first arc, but it may as well have just called the episodes Stalling for Time, Part 1 through 5. But they don't really seem to get that tone right at all in the episodes where it matters the most. Depending on who's on screen, it seems like it might be 2 or even 3 different shows all haphazardly trying to spiral towards a conclusion. Here's the thing. There are some directors and writers who can make a show's politicking as interesting as the robot fighting, and there are some who cannot. There are those who can create shows like Ghost in the Shell and Gundam, and there are those who should stick to making Godanar and the next Mazinger reboot. There's nothing wrong with trying to go out and make a show like Ghost in the Shell standalone complex, but recognize that if your subplotting is as dull as dishwater, stick to the important stuff, like getting the characters engaging and interesting. That's what will bring people back to your show for repeat viewings, and, well, yes, Captain Earth hits that stride. It makes the characters engaging and interesting. It still has that stupid slice of life crap all wrapped up into it, and, worst of all, it doesn't do what it needs to in that first half. That's the important thing. When I go back to watch this show, and I will watch this show again, I will start at episode 14 and go from there. And I've said it before, and I'll say it again, the inmates are running the asylum. It's the same problem Marvel had in the 90s, and it's only now shaking off. People are just aping what they saw when they were kids. They don't get what made it good, they just remember enjoying it. However, like I said, once they finally hit that halfway point where someone told them, hey, get this boat moving, it picks up perfectly fine. You just may resent it for running so slow up to that point. This was airing at the same time as All Noah Zero, and I think it kind of got overshadowed by the sheer amount of, 1, hype that show had, and 2, morons singing its praises. This is a way better show than All Noah Zero. It is a way better looking show than All Noah Zero. It's a way better plotted, paced, and put together show than All Noah Zero, but it doesn't have that brand name to it. This is a much better version of the Super Robots vs. Real Robots package and features characters with things like personality and interesting character arcs. The show has a lot of surprises hiding in it if you're willing to give it a shot, and the whole kit and caboodle plays well enough. Well, it's probably not the kind of show that you should try and drag people into mecha on. It's certainly one of the better mech shows to release this decade, because goodness knows it's been pretty fucking light the last few years. It's not the best, it's got pacing problems, sure, and there's some really dumb amounts of fan service going on in the first half, but it's well worth the time investment overall. Some anime you just kind of have to let happen to you, and while I won't throw too much shade on anyone who doesn't particularly care for the way Captain Earth plays out, for those of us mecha jocks who love us some big smashy robots, I think this will give you a good time. The show is currently available on Crunchyroll or on DVD and Blu-ray from Sentai Filmworks. There's no dub for it, likely because no voice actor could say some of these lines without busting a gut, but at this point I doubt that's going to bother anybody. If Captain Earth made one misstep, it was airing against All Noah Zero, but robot jocks like me looking back on it will probably find this one preferable in the long run. So to cap things off, I would recommend that you put Captain Earth in your orbit sooner rather than later.